I stood there, in the chaos of my own life, and I thought about the first rule of any good sauce. It's not the heat, it's not the spice, it's the base, the foundation. Without it, everything you add on top is just noise. Jude never understood that. He thought the restaurant, my restaurant, was a collection of assets: 4 walls, a liquor license, a staff, and a little black book filled with my recipes. He thought he'd bought the soul of the place. What he'd actually bought was a corpse, and he just hadn't realized it yet. But he was about to. The phone in my hand was buzzing with a name I knew well: Maria, my former sous chef, my prodigy. Her texts were a staccato rhythm of pure panic. But this story doesn't start with her panic. It starts with Jude's smile. The kind of smile a man gives when he thinks he's just pulled off the cleverest trick in the world. So, before we get into the beautiful, slow-motion train wreck that was about to unfold, I need to know I'm not just talking to myself here. If you've ever poured your entire being into something, only to have someone else try to sign their name at the bottom, let me know. Drop a comment, hit that like button. It helps to know you're not alone when you're standing in the rubble, figuring out how to rebuild. It wasn't about revenge. I need you to understand that from the beginning. It was about balance. It was about restoring a natural order that had been violently disrupted. The day Jude fired me, he did it in the middle of a Tuesday lunch service. He didn't have the decency to do it in an office. He did it right there by the pass, with the clatter of plates and the sizzle of the grill as his soundtrack. He called it a brand refresh. I called it an execution. He had this new kid with him. Leo. Leo didn't look like a chef. He looked like an advertisement for a specific kind of urban lumberjack aesthetic. Perfect beard, artful tattoos snaking up his forearms, an expression that mixed vapid friendliness with the unearned confidence of someone who had never truly failed at anything. Jude, all slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than my first car, gestured vaguely at me. He told the staff that I represented the past, a classic but static vision. He said Leo was the future, dynamic, agile, plugged into the zeitgeist. Leo's big claim to fame wasn't a dish. It was a TikTok channel with 200,000 followers who watched him make deconstructed avocado toast. My reputation was built on a single sauce, a sauce that took me 10 years to perfect. A decade of my life, distilled into a velvet mahogany-colored liquid that coated the back of a spoon like a secret. It was the reason we had a 3-month waiting list. It was the reason critics used words like transcendent. Jude held up my recipe book. It was a simple, leather-bound journal, its pages softened and stained with the ghosts of 1,000 experiments. He said, with that same infuriatingly smug smile, "We appreciate Bryn's contribution, and we're excited to continue her legacy." He thought the legacy was ink on a page. He handed the book to Leo, who took it like it was a prop. Leo glanced at me, a flicker of something that might have been pity in his eyes. He said he was a huge admirer of my work. It felt like an actor telling a war veteran he was a huge admirer of his service before playing him in a movie. The insult was in the comparison. Jude told me my final paycheck and a severance agreement would be couriered to my home. He suggested I clear out my locker by the end of the day to avoid any awkward overlap with the new team. He didn't understand that my team was still standing right there, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. Maria, my Maria, looked like she'd been struck. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her side towel. I just looked at Jude, held his gaze, and gave a single sharp nod. I didn't say a word. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a fight. The loudest thing in the room was my silence. I untied my apron, the one I'd tied every morning for 12 years, folded it into a neat square, and placed it on the stainless steel counter. Then I walked out. I didn't look back. The foundation had been ripped out. The noise was about to begin. The drive home was a blur. The city smeared past my windows, a watercolor of muted grays and indifferent lights. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in my car was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was a different kind of silence than the one I had deployed in the kitchen. That one was a weapon. This one was a void. When I got to my apartment, I walked into my own kitchen. It was a chef's kitchen, of course. Not large, but ruthlessly efficient. A Viking range, a rack of German steel knives that were an extension of my own hands, a marble slab for pastry that was always cool to the touch. It was my sanctuary, and in that moment, I hated it. It felt like a monument to a life that had just been declared obsolete. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the tools of my trade, the tools of my identity. And for the first time since I was a terrified apprentice who'd sliced her thumb to the bone, I felt a tremor in my hands. The professional composure, the armor I had worn for so long, finally cracked. It wasn't a dramatic screaming breakdown. It was quieter, and somehow worse. A single hot tear traced a path through the faint dusting of flour on my cheek. It was a feeling of such profound erasure. A decade. A full decade of my life, I had poured into that sauce. It wasn't just a recipe, it was a narrative. It was every late night, every dead end, every moment of frustration, and every flash of inspiration. I remembered the first time I tasted the combination that would become its base. It was an accident, a mistake. I was trying to develop a glaze for a duck breast, and I burned the pan. But in the smoky, caramelized bitterness, there was a note, something deep and complex that I had never tasted before. It became my obsession. For years I chased that note. I filled notebooks with failures. My apartment smelled perpetually of charred shallots and exotic vinegars. My social life withered. Friends would call, and I'd lie and say I was busy. I was busy. I was in a relationship with a ghost, trying to give it form. I thought about the old owner, Mr. Henderson, a gruff, old-school restaurateur with a palate like a holy relic. He was the one who gave me my first head chef position. He saw something in my stubborn pursuit of perfection. He'd come into the kitchen late at night, find me hunched over a row of tiny bowls, each with a slightly different version of the sauce. He wouldn't say much. He'd just take a spoon, taste one, and grunt. A grunt from Mr. Henderson was worth a sonnet from a food critic. He was the one who tasted version 74B, and his eyes went wide. He didn't grunt. He just whispered, "That's it. That's the one." He put it on the menu the next day. He called it simply Bryn's signature. He gave me credit. He understood that the person was the brand, not the other way around. He sold the restaurant when he retired, a quiet sale to a new hospitality group. He assured me they valued the institution he had built. He didn't know Jude was the man behind the curtain. Jude, who saw a balance sheet where Mr. Henderson saw a legacy. This is where the subplot, the hidden root system of my professional life, began to matter more than anything. My relationship with Maria. She wasn't just a sous chef. I had hired her straight out of culinary school. She was talented, but she was raw, full of fire but no focus. I saw the same obsessive spark in her that Mr. Henderson had seen in me. I took her under my wing. I didn't just teach her how to cook. I taught her how to think, how to taste, how to lead a kitchen not with fear, but with a quiet, unshakable competence. A kitchen, I told her, is a symphony. Every station is a section of the orchestra. The head chef is the conductor. You don't have to be the loudest instrument, but every single player must have their eyes on your baton. We developed a shorthand, a language of raised eyebrows and slight gestures that could communicate more than a shouted order. She was the only one I ever let get close to the sauce. I showed her the ingredients, the steps in the book, but I never showed her the real secret. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. It was that it couldn't be shown. It had to be felt. It was a truth that existed only in the nerves of my fingertips, in the calibration of my own senses. My phone buzzed again. A new text from Maria. It was a picture, a saucepan filled with a brownish, broken-looking liquid. It looked sad. Pathetic. The caption read, "Leo says the umami is weak. He added 3 times the fermented black garlic. It tastes like salty mud. I stared at the picture, and the single tear of despair was joined by a second, but this one felt different. It felt like steel. The sadness was hardening into something else, something cold and clear. Then came the final text. The catalyst. Bryn, it's a disaster. The sauce is wrong. Jude's yelling. Critic is confirmed for Friday. Genevieve Martel, please. Genevieve Martel. The dragon. The kingmaker. The one critic whose opinion could build a dynasty or shatter a reputation overnight. She was famously meticulous, famously unforgiving, and she was coming on Friday. A cold wave washed over me. But it wasn't fear, it was clarity. The kind of clarity you get in the dead of winter when the air is so cold it feels like a solid thing. Jude had created a vacuum. He had removed the most critical component from his own machine, and was now shocked that it was grinding to a halt. He thought he had the blueprints, but he didn't realize the architect had taken the laws of physics with her when she left. My despair didn't just turn into resolve. It crystallized. It became a plan. It wasn't about revenge. It was about allowing the truth to reveal itself. It was about letting them drown in the mess they had made. And I knew with absolute certainty that they were about to send out an SOS, and I would be the only one who could answer the call, but I wouldn't be answering it on their terms. Not anymore. I would answer it on mine. The board had been set. He just didn't know we were playing 2 different games. He was playing with my recipe book. I was playing with his entire future. A plan without foresight is just a wish. And I don't deal in wishes. I deal in certainties. The truth is my secret plan began long before Jude showed me the door. It began the day he walked in. The first time I met him, he didn't ask me about my philosophy of food. He didn't ask about the team. He asked me what our margins were on the signature dish. He looked at my sauce, the culmination of a decade of my life, and saw a percentage. In that moment, I knew my time at the hearth had an expiration date. So I started building a lifeboat. The recipe book Jude so proudly gave to Leo was a masterpiece of misdirection. It was completely accurate and utterly useless. Every ingredient was listed. Every measurement precise. Every step was there. Written in my neat, clear script. Sauce the aromatics. Deglaze the pan. Simmer for 3 hours. What it didn't say was how. It didn't explain the secret, the part that lived in my muscle memory. It was a multi-stage emulsification process that relied on temperature shifts so precise they couldn't be measured by a kitchen thermometer. You had to feel it. The first stage was the shock. You had to take the base liquid off the heat and let it cool to a very specific lukewarm temperature, a point where the fats were just on the verge of separating but hadn't yet given up. Too warm and the emulsion would be greasy. Too cold and it would break. Then came the whip. You couldn't use a machine. A blender or an immersion circulator was too violent. It would tear the delicate fat molecules. It had to be done by hand, with a balloon whisk and a specific figure-8 motion that folded the liquid back on itself, introducing air without losing structure. You had to listen for the sound to change from a sloshing to a soft, velvety whisper. The final stage was the rest. This was the most counterintuitive part. After achieving the perfect texture, you had to place the sauce in a controlled temperature water bath for exactly 17 minutes. Not 15, not 20. 17. It was during this rest that the flavors would meld, the proteins would relax, and the sauce would achieve its signature deep, complex character. It was a process born of 1,000 failures, and it existed nowhere on paper. I had debated for weeks whether to document it. My gut told me not to. My gut told me that knowledge was my leverage, my power. It wasn't about being deceitful, it was about self-preservation. It was about knowing my worth wasn't in a book that could be copied, it was in the hands that wrote it. But the technique wasn't my only lifeboat. The other was named Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch was a regular, a quiet, impeccably dressed man in his late 60s who always sat at the same corner table. He was old money, the kind that whispered instead of shouted. He wasn't a foodie, He was a connoisseur. He never gushed, but he saw everything. He would often ask to speak to me after his meal, and our conversations were never about the food itself, but about the philosophy behind it. He once told me, "Chef, what you do here is not replication. It is a performance. A live one every single night." He understood. About 6 months before Jude fired me, after sensing the shift in the restaurant's atmosphere, I had a conversation with Mr. Finch. I told him I was feeling creatively restless, that I dreamed of a smaller, more intimate space where the focus was purely on the craft, with no compromises. I was planting a seed. He had simply nodded, a thoughtful look in his eye, and said, "When you decide to plant that garden, Bryn, let me know. I have always found it wise to invest in the gardener, not just the soil." That conversation was my parachute. Now, it was time to pull the cord. My first call wasn't back to Jude, it was to Maria. I needed a secure channel. We met in a small, anonymous coffee shop miles away from the restaurant. She looked exhausted, her usual bright energy dimmed by stress. She slid into the booth opposite me, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a cup of tea. She said, "It's worse than I can imagine. Leo is a tyrant of trends. He doesn't taste, he curates. He arranges food for photos, caring more about the lighting than the flavor. He tried to innovate my sauce. He added yuzu for brightness, smoked paprika for depth. He was throwing expensive words at a problem that required understanding. The kitchen staff, my old team, was on the verge of mutiny. They respected the craft, and Leo was treating it like a content creation opportunity. She told me Jude was a ghost, haunting the dining room, his face a permanent mask of anxiety. He'd corner her, asking what was wrong with the sauce. Did Bryn use a different supplier? Was there a secret ingredient? He was looking for a simple, purchasable solution. He couldn't grasp that the solution had been a person, and he had fired her. Maria was my eyes and ears, my loyal insider. But I needed another piece on the board, my supplier. I didn't get my ingredients from the big commercial trucks like most restaurants. I had cultivated relationships. My most important one was with a man named Silas, a grizzled farmer who grew the most incredible variety of wild garlic on a small protected patch of land upstate. It wasn't a rare ingredient, but his was different. The soil, the air, the way he harvested it. It gave the garlic a subtle, sweet, almost floral note that was the quiet backbone of my sauce's aromatic profile. I was his biggest client. I called Silas. I told him I was no longer at the hearth. I told him I was starting a new project, and I wanted to secure his entire fall harvest. He didn't hesitate. He said, "Bryn, I sell to you, not to an address. You tell me where to send the crates." It was a simple conversation, a quiet act of loyalty, but it was a strategic masterstroke. Jude and Leo wouldn't be able to get Silas's garlic. They could get other wild garlic. Sure, but it wouldn't be the same. They would be chasing a ghost in the flavor profile, another missing piece they couldn't identify. They were trying to solve a puzzle, and I was quietly pocketing the most important pieces. My plan was solidifying. It was a three-pronged attack, executed in silence. The flawed recipe, the waiting investor, and the secured supply chain. Jude thought he was in a battle for a recipe. He was about to find out he was in a war for the very soul of his business, a war he had already lost. He just hadn't received the casualty report yet. The first move in a quiet war is never a cannon shot. It's a whisper, a subtle shift in the landscape that your enemy doesn't notice until they've already stumbled. My first move wasn't an attack. It was an announcement, a carefully worded email to Alistair Finch. The subject line was simple: the garden. The body of the email was even simpler. "Dear Alistair, I have found fertile ground. The door is open. Bryn." I hit send. It felt less like an email and more like launching a ship. I knew he would understand the coded language. It was the beginning of our new reality, and the beginning of the end for Jude's. The next few days were a masterclass in watching a man unravel from a safe distance. Maria became my real-time narrator of the chaos at the hearth. Her texts were a litany of escalating panic. Day 1. Leo tried a new batch of the sauce. He used a different brand of balsamic, thinking it was the vinegar. It's sharp now. Acidic. The staff is refusing to serve it. He threw a whisk against the wall. I pictured the scene, the noise, the anger born of incompetence. In my quiet apartment, I was sketching out the layout for a new kitchen. The contrast was stark. Their world was loud, frantic and shrinking. Mine was silent, focused and expanding. Day 2, Jude brought in another consultant, some guy with a Michelin star from 20 years ago. He tasted the sauce and told Jude it lacked soul. Jude almost fired him on the spot. They're now convinced I had a secret ingredient. They're taste testing everything. Saffron, truffle oil, anchovy paste. They're making it worse with every addition. It's a Frankenstein's monster of a sauce. The irony was delicious. They were searching for a silver bullet, a single item they could buy to fix a fundamental flaw in their understanding. They thought the problem was in the pantry. The problem was in the mirror. The whisper campaign I had initiated with my allies began to bear fruit. Mr. Finch didn't just reply to my email. He made a few calls. 2 of the Hearth's most prominent regular clients, both friends of his and titans of industry, quietly canceled their long-standing weekly reservations. The excuse was a last-minute scheduling conflict, but the message was clear. Then a few others followed suit. It was a slow, quiet exodus, not a flood, but a steady drain. The kind you don't notice until the well is almost dry. Jude's front-of-house manager reported the cancellations. Maria told me he didn't yell. He went pale. A bad review from Genevieve Martel would be a public humiliation. The silent departure of his highest-spending clientele was a direct threat to his bottom line. One was about ego, the other was about survival. Then came the call I had been waiting for. My phone rang, displaying Jude's name. I let it ring 3 times, just to let the silence sit with him. Then I answered, my voice perfectly level, perfectly calm. Bryn speaking. He sounded terrible. The smug, condescending tone was gone, replaced by a thready, desperate edge. He started with a blustering attempt at authority. Something about my non-compete clause, which he seemed to have forgotten was voided when he fired me without cause. I let him spin for a moment, before calmly pointing that out. The silence on his end was telling. Then the dam broke. He started pleading. Bryn, we need you. Leo is in over his head. It's not working. The sauce, it's just not right. What are we missing? I let the question hang in the air. What are you missing, Jude? I repeated, my voice soft. You have the book. You have a chef with 200,000 followers. You have the finest ingredients money can buy. What could you possibly be missing? It was a cruel question, and I enjoyed it. He stumbled over his words, offering me my job back. A raise, a new title, Executive Culinary Director. He'd give me full creative control. He would even fire Leo. He was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. This was the moment for the line I had rehearsed in my head, the line that some might call illogical, but for me was the entire point. I told him no. He was stunned into silence. But why? I can give you anything you want. I said, you can't, Jude. You had what I wanted. You had a team I built, a culture of excellence I fostered, and a kitchen that ran on respect. You bulldozed it to build a stage for a social media star. You can't put the soul back into a body once it's gone. You don't need a chef, Jude. You need an exorcist. It was a declaration of independence. It wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward and leaving him behind in the ruins he had created. I told him I might be willing to consult, to write down the technique he was missing, for a one-time fee. I named a number so astronomically high, it was laughable. It was the price of a mid-range luxury car. It wasn't an offer. It was an insult, wrapped in the language of business. The gasp on the other end of the line was my checkmate. He thought he could buy back my soul. I had just informed him that he could no longer even afford my time. The power shift was palpable. It was no longer about whether I would help them. It was about the terms of their surrender. The phone call with Jude had been a declaration, but the true victory came in waves, each one eroding more of his crumbling empire. The exodus of loyal clients continued, a quiet but devastating vote of no confidence. It was a testament to a simple truth of the service industry. People don't give their loyalty to a brand, they give it to a person. For years I was the reason they came to the hearth. Jude had mistakenly believed the restaurant's name on the door was the asset, when all along, the asset was the woman in the kitchen. Jude's desperation escalated. He sent a fumbling, legally dubious cease and desist letter, drafted by what I can only assume was a very cheap lawyer. It accused me of intellectual property theft, which was absurd. The property in question had never left my intellect. My new lawyer, a shark recommended by Mr. Finch, responded with a 2-sentence letter that was a work of art in its brutal efficiency. It pointed out that my employment had been terminated without cause, and that any proprietary techniques not explicitly documented and signed over as company property remained my own. It concluded with a polite but firm suggestion that any further baseless accusations would be met with a lawsuit for defamation and tortious interference. Jude went silent after that. The legal saber rattling was the last gasp of a man who knew he had no real weapons left. Then came the desperate counteroffer, the one that truly revealed how little he understood me. He emailed me, personally this time. The tone was completely different. It was stripped of all ego, all pretense. It was the raw, pleading voice of a man watching his investment burn to the ground. He offered to double the outrageous consulting fee I had quoted him. He offered me a percentage of the gross revenue. He offered to publicly apologize. He wrote, "Just tell me what you want, Bryn. I'll make it happen." What I wanted wasn't something he could give me. He was trying to buy a solution, but my departure wasn't the problem. It was a symptom. The disease was his own arrogance, his own fundamental misunderstanding of value. I didn't even reply to the email. My silence was the answer. It was a more powerful negotiation tactic than any demand I could have made. Every moment that passed with the critic's visit looming was another turn of the screw. He was trapped in a box of his own making, and the walls were closing in. He had the keys to the restaurant, but I had the keys to its success, and I had already given them to someone else. The final act of this drama deserved a stage. Jude requested a meeting. In person. I agreed, but not on his territory. Not in the sterile corporate boardroom of his hospitality group, and certainly not at the hearth. That place was a graveyard of memories now. I chose a small, neutral cafe, halfway between my apartment and his office. I arrived first. I chose a table by the window and ordered a simple black coffee. When he walked in, he looked like a ghost. His expensive suit hung on him. His face was sallow, and the confident swagger was gone, replaced by a weary shuffle. He looked defeated before he even sat down. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He just slumped into the chair opposite me and said, "Bryn, the critic. She's coming tomorrow night. You have to help me." It wasn't a request, it was a prayer from a man who had lost his faith. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I let the silence stretch. Then I looked at him. My expression unreadable. I said, "Help you how, Jude? You told your entire staff my approach was outdated. A static vision. It seems the future you envision tastes a bit off." I used his own words, his own corporate jargon, and turned them into tiny sharp daggers. He flinched. I was wrong, he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I made a mistake. I was arrogant. "Please, name your price. Just for one night. Come in, make the sauce. Save us." I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Jude, there's a problem with your request. You seem to be under the impression that I am still on the market." He looked confused. I continued. Mr. Alistair Finch and I have just finalized the lease on a new space in the West Village. A small 40-seat restaurant. We're calling it Aperture. It's going to be very exclusive. By invitation only, for the first 6 months. I saw the blood drain from his face. This wasn't just about me refusing to help him. This was about me becoming his direct competitor. And Maria, I added, twisting the knife just a little more, has already accepted my offer to be my chef de cuisine. Silas is delivering his entire harvest to our new kitchen next week. We're building something new, Jude. Something built on a proper foundation. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. He was processing the totality of his loss. He hadn't just lost a chef. He had lost his entire support structure, his supply chain, his key staff, and now he was about to lose his reputation. Then I delivered the final quiet blow. "Oh, and about Genevieve Martel," I said, picking up my purse as if the thought had just occurred to me. "She and I are old acquaintances. I called her yesterday. A professional courtesy. I just wanted to let her know that I was no longer at the hearth, so she wouldn't be disappointed when she came in for dinner." His eyes widened in horror. He understood immediately. I hadn't told her the restaurant was bad. I didn't need to. I had simply reframed her entire visit. She wasn't going to review a struggling restaurant. She was going to write an obituary for a great one. Her review wouldn't just be about a bad sauce. It would be about the absence of a brilliant one. It would be a story about a fool who had inherited a crown jewel and swapped it for a piece of glass. I stood up. "I wish you the best of luck, Jude." I didn't. It was the most dishonest thing I had said all week. I walked out of the cafe and didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the chill of his failure from across the street. The war was over. It had ended in silence, with a cup of coffee. The end for Jude came not with a bang, but with a scathing, beautifully written review. Genevieve Martel was, as always, a poet of culinary destruction. She didn't just criticize the food, she eulogized what it once was. She wrote about the hearth as a place that had lost its ghost, a kitchen where you could taste the empty space left behind by a singular talent. She called Leo's version of my sauce a clumsy forgery and a sad, muddy echo of a masterpiece. It was brutal, it was honest, and it was exactly what he deserved. Maria sent me the link the morning it was published. A week later, she sent me another message, a screenshot of an internal memo. The board of the hospitality group had called an emergency meeting. Jude was out, effective immediately. Leo, the TikTok chef, had been let go the day after the review dropped. His social media went dark. The noise had finally stopped. My new reality is a quiet one. Aperture is everything I dreamed of. Small, intimate, and uncompromising. The kitchen is my design, a fluid space of stainless steel and warm copper. There are no frantic shouts, only the low hum of a team in perfect sync. Maria is at my side, no longer a protégé, but a partner. Her creativity, now unleashed, is a joy to watch. Mr. Finch sits at his corner table twice a week, not as an investor, but as a friend. He never talks business. He just eats, and sometimes he gives me a small, satisfied nod. It's worth more than any 5-star review. My sauce is the centerpiece of the menu, of course. But here, it feels different. It's not just a signature dish, it's a statement of purpose. It's a testament to the idea that some things cannot be bought, cannot be copied, and cannot be rushed. They have to be earned. The soul of the work is tied to the soul of the worker. A truth so simple, and so easily forgotten by men like Jude. My revenge, if you can call it that, was not in his failure. It was in my success. It was in proving that my value was not tied to his restaurant or his approval. My value was portable. It was inherent. I carried it with me when I walked out his door, folded neatly like my apron. On the wall of my small office, I have 2 things framed side by side. On the left is the cold, formal termination letter from Jude. On the right is Genevieve Martel's review of Aperture. It's a single sentence I had her sign for me at the opening. It reads, Bryn is not a chef who cooks food. She is a chef who creates memories, and I am grateful to have a new one. The contrast is the whole story. Erasure and creation. A past I was forced out of, and a future I built myself. And this is where the story becomes about you. Because we've all had a Jude in our lives. We've all had someone look at our life's work and see only a line item on a spreadsheet. They think because they own the office, or the kitchen or the computer, that they own the talent. They think the magic is in the tools, not in the hands that wield them. But your talent, your experience, your muscle memory, that is yours. It's the one asset they can never ever take from you. You can walk out of any building, and you take your value with you. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. It wasn't about revenge, it was about remembering that the most valuable thing you can ever build is a reputation they can't steal, and a future they can't control. If this story felt true to you, if you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own value, then do me a favor, like this video, and leave a comment below telling me about the moment you knew you had to build your own table instead of waiting for a seat at theirs. Share this with anyone who needs to be reminded of their own power, and please, hit that subscribe button. It helps to know there are others out there who understand that the best work comes not from a recipe book, but from the soul. Thank you for listening.